Hey, I'm so glad you clicked on this video. In this video, Pastor Andrew is going to share a message about how when we're in the middle of life's challenges, sometimes it feels like we don't have anywhere to go, like we're not going to win. But when we step back and we look at things from God's perspective, what we find is that in Him, we already have victory. And those things in life that seem like they're going to destroy us, God can even use those things for good. So it's my hope and my prayer today that as you watch this video, that you're encouraged, that you're challenged, and that you grow.
Morning. So my name is Andrew Ross. I'm the youth pastor here at the Gathering, and I'm glad that you guys are all here this morning. I'm glad to be speaking with you. So I'm used to speaking with teens from 6th to 12th grade, so if I use any slang, maybe just ask a student later, what did that word mean that he said? Because I'm so used to using it. But this morning, as I was preparing to come up here, I started to think man, how long have we been here? And it's crazy to think that March, I think the first week in April is our technical first Sunday here. But it's been basically a year that we've been here so far, and it's been an awesome year so far. Being here, working with our teens, and the youth group's going great back there. If you have students 6th to 12th grade, send them back there. We want to see them back there. So one thing I am doing new, though, this year that I've never done before is I'm teaching some middle school Bible classes down at Dayton Christian. And I gotta give it up for you teachers. You guys are absolute rock stars. I knew this before I started teaching, but now I know that the sickness is real. And what I mean by that, this year, I've been more sick this year than I've ever been in my entire life. It has been crazy. I thought I had a good immune system working with teens and kids my whole life in youth ministry, but now I have 130 middle schoolers in my face every day with their illnesses and sicknesses, and it's been nuts. And then you add a family of 5 on top of that, right? And you would think that maybe just 1 or 2 of us would get it and it'd quickly pass through the home. But no, every time there's a new illness, it usually takes about 2 weeks and it goes from person, they get better and we think it's done. No, the next kid gets sick, and it's been crazy, right? And my wife would say I'm dramatic with it, but I think I could be a case study this year. I think I'm catching new variants of things and different kinds of colds no one else has caught. And in fact, a week and a half ago, I had a cold and I'm still got some congestion. So if I need to drink water this morning, forgive me. But it's been an awesome year so far being here and doing that. And, I joke about the sickness, but this morning I want to focus on when sometimes things get tough and when life piles on us and when we feel like we're being attacked. And, we can joke about it sometimes in life when things pile on. We have a saying, we say, when it rains, it good. You guys thought it was awesome. When it rains, it pours, right? We say that. And sometimes life just happens like that. For instance, when we ever have a car repair, and it's never a small car repair, it's gotta be a big car repair, we think we're good, and the next week, the next car needs fixed, right? I don't know if that ever happens with you guys, but it can never be one thing. It's got to be something else as well. Or it could be sickness in your family or something at your job or finances, right? It seems like things pile up sometimes. But what about those times in our life when things seem to go really sideways? When things go really bad, when life is going well and you think things are great, then all of a sudden something happens that flips your life upside down. Maybe it's a broken relationship in the family. Maybe it's a death in the family. Maybe it's an illness. And there's times that we think, why is this happening? Why is this happening? This is what we want to talk about this morning, because when those things happen in my life, sometimes I feel hopeless and I feel alone because I'm kind of like a fixer. So whenever things go bad, I want to fix things. But when it comes to some of these issues, sometimes you just can't fix them. And we can feel hopeless in our own lives when things go bad. And I can imagine this morning as we talk, you guys will think about things in your life that have gone wrong. And maybe this morning you're going through something this morning, whether it's with family, whether it's with work, no matter what it is. But this morning I want to focus on that sometimes we feel like we are attacked. And we know we're attacked because, there is evil in the world, and we're going to be talking about evil in the world. But this morning I hope that the message brings you hope that evil happens, but God overcomes. And so the title this morning is, But God. And I'll use that a couple times, and there'll be one point in the sermon that I'll use this. I'm going to point to you guys. We're all going to say it together, all right? So don't let me down. You guys did really good with the last one, so don't let me down on the next one. So if there's one person, though, as I was planning this morning to think about had this, a lot of issues happen out of nowhere in Scripture. One of my favorite people is Joseph. So this morning, we're going to be looking at Joseph. Joseph is one of the more fascinating stories in the Bible to me. One, Joseph is 13 chapters in Genesis. Out of the 50 chapters, Joseph stretches 13 of those chapters. 25% of Genesis. That's a big chunk of the first book of the Bible, right? Especially when it took 10 words to describe God creating the heavens and the earth, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, obviously goes on to talk more about all of creation, but Joseph takes up a lot of chapters. Now, don't be worrying this morning. We're not going to go through all 13 chapters. We're going to take more of what they call is a 10,000-foot look with focusing on a few short things in Joseph's life. So Joseph had a lot going on in his life, and we're going to be looking at that. He had 12 siblings, and he was the youngest sibling at the time, and he was the son of Jacob and Rachel. And Rachel was Jacob's fourth wife. He had 4 wives that he had kids with. And so this morning, if you're thinking a lot of my issues in the past or right now are because of a dysfunctional family, just wait. We're going to be talking about a dysfunctional family this morning with this family right here. So Joseph was the youngest of Jacob at Jacob's old age, and it made Joseph his favorite son. Now, as I was doing this, I always thought about that awkward question sometimes our kids ask. Now, my kids I have twins that are 1 year old, and I have a 4-year-old. So they haven't asked me this question yet, but I remember when I was a kid, we'd ask our parents, hey, who's your favorite child, right? Who's the favorite kid? And some of the kids may be looking at the parents right now yeah, who's the favorite kid, right? And it's always an awkward question. And most parents will say, well, all of you are our favorite. Or, I heard some parents say, well, I just tell that child at the moment that they're my favorite. So they all think that they're my favorite. But I'm imagining there's times in your lives where a kid may pop in your mind. Like for me, I'm like, whoever is the most obedient at the time, that's my favorite child in that moment right there. But Joseph was the favorite. He was the favorite. And we can look at Genesis 37:3. It says this. It'll be on the screen. It says, now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his sons because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. Now, maybe be a little bit more candid than what Jacob was doing here about who your favorite is, right? Maybe don't be so obvious with who your favorite is. And why do I say that? Well, the very next verse 4 says this. It says, but when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. So Jacob's given us a 101 of what not to do as a parent. Don't make it so obvious that this is my favorite child, but the brothers could not speak peacefully to him. They did not like him. They hated him. Well, the story of Joseph escalates really quickly here. See, Joseph had a couple of dreams, and we'll look in the future. Joseph had a gift of interpreting dreams as well. But Joseph had a couple of dreams, and he went to his brother to tell him what the dreams were. And actually, his brothers are the ones who interpreted it, said, so you think that we are going to bow down to you? Because Joseph's dreams were basically like, hey, we are in a field, and my sheath rose, and yours guys bowed down to me. And so they're like, wait, Joseph, are you telling us that we're going to bow down to you one day, right? They're already mad at him because he's the favorite. He's got a cool jacket, right? Now he's giving them these dreams, and they are not happy. And one day, Jacob sends Joseph out to go see his brothers. They're like, hey, your brothers are tending out into the pasture. Go and meet them. And so their brothers are working, and I can just see this as I'm reading in Scripture, that they look up and they see Joseph coming, and they probably know it's Joseph because he's got that colorful jacket, which just brings up all those memories that he's the favorite and we hate him. And what is he going to do? And most brothers, you would think that if they're going to do something, the logical thing would be, let's play a prank on him. Maybe let's rough him up a little bit. But no, it literally said as Joseph was coming, they conspired to kill Joseph. Talk about escalating quickly, right? That escalated really quick. It went from, we couldn't speak peacefully to him, but now here he comes. How are we going to kill Joseph when he gets down there? Their own brother. While he's coming down, one of the brothers, Reuben, said, let's not kill him. Let's just throw him in a well and we'll figure out what to do. And Reuben actually was thinking, I will take him back to my father and look really good. But then Judah has the smart idea of, let's not let Joseph die. Let's at least make money off of him, right? So Judah's at least a smart one. Like, if he dies, we don't get anything. So at least let's sell him. So people come and they end up selling Joseph into slavery. Now, I don't know about you, but when I'm reading this, I would not be surprised if I didn't know the story of Joseph, as if this is where it ended. I think it'd be very easy for it to end there, for Joseph to be like, man, my brothers, they threw me into a pit. They sold me into slavery. God, why did you allow this to happen? Things were going so well. You gave me these dreams. Things were going great. And now I'm being betrayed by my family. Maybe this morning it's not so hard for you guys to think what that may feel like. Some of you may have been betrayed by your family before, and maybe that's some hurt that you're still carrying this morning. But I think it would have been easy to say that the story could have ended there, but God had other plans for Joseph. The story picks back up in chapter 39. He gets taken to Egypt and he gets sold to a man named Potiphar. So if anyone's trying to think of a really cool name for a kid, Potiphar is an awesome name. Every time I hear that, I'm like, why don't we have more Potiphars in the world? That's a great name. So he gets sold to a man named Potiphar. And again, it could have just been ended there, that Joseph's like, and he spent the rest of his days working in Potiphar's house. But literally the second verse in this chapter, it'll be up on the screen here. I find it funny. It says, but the Lord was with Joseph. And that shows up quite a few times in Joseph's story. It's to say that even though that you just had this thing happen, that things were going good and your brothers betrayed you and sold you into slavery, and now you're working in a stranger's home, the Lord's still with Joseph. And it said because of the Lord was with Joseph, that he was very successful, actually. Everything he did, everything he touched multiplied, and that pleased Potiphar so much that he actually put Joseph in charge of everything that he owned, because Joseph was doing so well. He was doing well. And then in verse 6, I think it's funny, verse 6, it won't be on the screen, it said that Joseph was handsome in appearance and in form. I'm like, why did they throw that in there? Like, why did they need to throw that Joseph was handsome in appearance and in form? That's something that I cannot relate to this morning, but it says that Joseph was handsome in appearance and form. He was successful. And it's in there because right after that, Potiphar's wife notices Joseph. And she probably notices him maybe a little too much. You know, this guy, he's working in the home, he's successful, he looks good. And Potiphar's wife actually tries to seduce Joseph. But remember, the Lord is with Joseph. Joseph is a man of great faith, and he turns down Potiphar's wife because he knows that this is the wife of another man and it would be a sin against God, so he respectfully declines. She doesn't like this, though. I don't know how long it is that goes, but the next time that they encounter, she grabs Joseph. Joseph runs out, leaving his robe in her hand, and she's mad that she can't have Joseph. So she said, I am going to set him up, and I'm going to say that he came on to me, that he seduced me. And so she wrongfully accuses Joseph. Joseph then gets thrown in prison. Just as everything seemed like it was going well again, that he was successful in Potiphar's house and he got put in charge, and now all of a sudden he's wrongfully accused of something he's not done, and now he's in prison again. The verse right after saying he got thrown in prison is verse 21. It says this, but the Lord was with Joseph. Still, through Joseph's, all this that's happening to his life, when everything seems to be going well, all of a sudden things keep getting flipped upside down. Scripture makes it clear that through all of it, that the Lord was still with Joseph. And because he was with Joseph, he actually got put in charge of all the prisoners in the prison. It says that he was in charge of all of them. And I'm going to kind of speed through a little bit here. While he was in prison, there was a couple prisoners that came in. There was a cupbearer and a baker that worked for the Pharaoh. And so they got thrown in there, and they had some dreams. And remember, Joseph is really good at interpreting dreams. So they go to Joseph, and Joseph says, hey, your dream, what it means is that Pharaoh's going to let you out in a few days. And it happens. So they get let out, and they're back with the Pharaoh working, and time passes, and all of a sudden Pharaoh has a dream that's really conflicting to him, and he doesn't know what it means. But those two that were in prison with him remembered, hey, do you remember Joseph, that guy who interpreted our dreams, and he interpreted them correctly? Let's see if he can maybe help the Pharaoh out. So they bring Joseph out to meet the Pharaoh. And Joseph is able to talk with the Pharaoh about his dream. And Joseph tells him, hey, what the dream means is that there's going to be 7 good years of crop followed by 7 years of famine. And it's going to be bad. If you don't do something about it now, a lot of people are going to starve. A lot of people are going to die. You need to start preparing for this now. And so Pharaoh actually pulls him out of prison. He tells Joseph, hey, you are in charge of this. Since you are the one that's interpreted this, you are in charge of it. So quickly, out of prison, Joseph again, things start to look up again. He's now basically second in command of the greatest nation and preparing for this famine that's going to starve many, this famine that's going to kill many people if they don't start preparing for it now. So it's Joseph's job to prepare for this famine and gather food. So things are starting to look up for him. He even gets married and has a son. He was able to forget about all that heartache and betrayal in his father's house. Joseph even named his son Manasseh, which Joseph says means God made me forget my troubles in father's house. So Joseph was able to put those hurts behind him, but God still had a plan for him. God still had those dreams that he had at the beginning. He still had a purpose for his life. Even though he forgot about it, and those brothers and his father's house, they were not kept safe from this famine as well. See, they were also struggling when the famine hit, and they heard Egypt had some food. So they go to Egypt to get some food. And to keep this part really short, because we could spend a couple weeks just in this part right here, the brothers end up going to Egypt. They actually go a couple times. There's a lot of drama that happens between them. Joseph finally reveals to his brothers who he is, and then he brings the whole family out. He sets them up. He's taking care of them. Things seem to be going great. And then his father, Jacob, dies. And this is where the brothers start to worry. And this is where we're going to kind of focus on today. The brothers start to worry. What if Joseph was just being nice and cool to us because dad was around? And now that dad's gone, he's going to get his revenge on us. So after the funeral, they go and confront Joseph with their worries. And Joseph, this is my favorite verse in the Bible. Joseph is looking at his brothers in the eyes, those same brothers that sold him into slavery, and says this. It's Genesis 50:20. It says, as for you, you meant evil against me. Now say it with me. Here it is. But God meant it for the good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. I love that verse, to think that this is what Joseph is saying to his brothers as they're bringing up that pain and hurt again. It would have been very easy for Joseph to be like, yeah, you know what? Now that dad is gone, I'm going to get my revenge. You guys are all going to spend time in prison because I had to spend time in prison for wrongfully doing this to me. But instead, this is how he reacts. Now, by saying this, Joseph understood a couple things. I want to look at just the first half of this verse. The first half of this verse is, as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for the good. See, one thing, my first point this morning, is Joseph understood that God has authority. And why do I say that? Well, when I look at this verse, that word meant kind of jumps out at me, because to mean to do something means it's got to be premeditated, right? To mean to do something, it wasn't an accident. Just like Joseph's brothers, it said that they were trying to conjure up a plan on how to kill Joseph. It's premeditated. It's premeditated evil against Joseph. But God has authority. One cool thing about that word meant, as I was doing studying, that word meant, that's the way it's used here, its root word back in the Hebrew language is to weave. And why I like that is if it's like to weave yarn. Well, one, that's how evil works in our life sometimes. Evil sometimes in our lives tries to weave itself into our life, and it tries to make things look good and makes it look like it's truth. If we think about the first sin that happened, the serpent twisted words around it, tried to make things look good, tried to, make God's word sound a little bit different, and, Eve fell for it, but that's how evil works in our lives. But God meant it for the good, meaning that God is weaving a different pattern, meaning that God can take those things and make them good. As the world and our flesh are trying to deceive us and weave its way into our life, God can take that pattern and use it for the good because he has authority, and ultimately he has authority over evil. And he can take those things that are meant for bad in our lives that we're thinking about this morning, and he can turn them for the good in your life, but ultimately for the good in his glory. Now, this means that God knew what was going to happen to Joseph. This means that God already knows what's going to happen to us and what has already happened in our life. And sometimes that's hard to understand, right? Why would God allow these things to happen? Why would God let so many evil things happen to us, or so many evil things that happened to Joseph? Well, one, it's because we live in a fallen world with sin in the world, but God's saying, hey, even though the evil happens, it doesn't have to have the last say in your life. If you allow me to work in your life and you stick with me just the way that I stuck with Joseph, I can take those evil things that are trying to weave into your life and I can make a new pattern. In fact, I've already been making a new pattern because I already know what's coming, and you have to allow me to then turn this around for the good. So even though evil happens, God has already been weaving a better pattern for your life. Now let's look at the second half of this verse 20. It says, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. This is what Joseph says to his brothers. By saying this, Joseph understood that one, God has authority, but he also, my second point today is that God has a purpose. God has a purpose. Joseph understood that God had a purpose all along, even through all those terrible things that were happening. God was working in the immediate of Joseph's life, as well as he was working in the future of Joseph's life and beyond Joseph's life. We'll look here in a second. See, Joseph understood that God had a purpose, what was happening. It was bigger than himself. And the reason why I say that, one of my favorite, and if you've not read the whole story of Joseph, I challenge you guys to go read it because it's a great story. In chapter 45, when he's talking to his brothers after he revealed who he was, and they're asking him about, his life and everything, this is Joseph's response to his brothers. In chapter 45, he basically tells his brothers, when you sold me, God sent me. And when I read that, it blows my mind because I'm like, that's not the perspective that I would have at all. I would not have that perspective, but Joseph had a perspective that, you know what, you did these bad things, but I knew all along that God was sending me to do something else. I didn't know what it was going to look like. I didn't know what God's purpose was, but all I knew is that God was sending me to do something, and that's what made it all right. God's end game perspective can change our in game perspective. Joseph understood God's end game perspective, so it was able to change his end game perspective. For us, I'm sure there's always been things in our lives that we've not liked to do and hard things that we've had to do, but if we know that the results will be good, it makes it easier to do hard things. The same thing is true when evil's stacking up against us and when we're being attacked, we ultimately know that God has a purpose and God ultimately has the victory. And so if we can change our perspective in that moment, it makes it a lot easier to go through those things, to know that God has a better end game. So we can change our end game perspective. So he was working in Joseph's immediate, but he was also working in the future. See, God's story is a beautiful story of redemption, and it's working throughout the whole book of the Bible. See, God had already made a promise to Joseph's great-grandfather, Abraham, that he was going to make him a father of a great nation, and he had this whole planned out. And so God already knew everything that was going to happen, and he had a purpose, and he knew that ultimately God's plan was going to be working through Joseph to save people and to keep them alive, but ultimately God's purpose was working towards and pointing to Jesus. Joseph's story is ultimately pointing to Jesus. Joseph was able to save the lives of many physically, but God knew the purpose eventually was that Jesus was going to save the lives of many spiritually. And he did so by dying on that cross that was meant for evil, that cross that thought it won, The cross that thought it was going to get the last say so, but again, God has authority over evil, and so that cross didn't win. So God's plan was ultimately for Jesus to come and defeat evil once and for all. Now, I don't want to minimize evil this morning because I know when we're in it, it's real, right? It's real. It can be dark. It can be painful. There's suffering that you can feel alone. But with God, evil does not have the last say so in your life because God's purpose is always for the good. So God's plan was all along to send his son Jesus for us. It was his plan. It was his purpose to defeat the ultimate act of evil. See, one thing Joseph knew, and as I read the story of Joseph, is that I understand that God is not a trailing God. And Joseph understood God's not trailing behind us, picking up the pieces as we go. Sometimes we think that, right? We're like, well, what's going to happen now, God? God's not just coming up behind us like, I don't know, I'm waiting for what decision do you make? What are we going to do now? That's not what God does. What brings me to my third point that I want to point out in the life of Joseph is that God goes before us, which should give us hope. Which should give us hope during those times of struggle and those times that we feel hopeless and those times that evil is attacking us and those times that we're in the thick of it, to know that God already has a way to prosper us out just the way that he was able to prosper Joseph out of the pit. But not only that, but we serve a God who came and understands where we've been, right? Jesus came and lived the life. He lived a blameless life. He was tempted. He had the ultimate evil act upon him, which brings me to my favorite verse, which is John 16:33. So this happened the night before Jesus was arrested. He's talking to his disciples about everything that's going to happen. And this is what he says to his disciples. He says, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. That's my favorite verse. Like if people ask me what my favorite verse, that's it. One, because Jesus makes it clear. He's telling all of us this morning, you're going to have troubles. We have troubles. We've experienced. We're going to still experience it. But Jesus gives us the hope that says, hey, take heart, because in me, I have already overcome the world. I've already defeated evil. That evil that's trying to form a weapon against you will never prosper with me because I've already defeated it. He made it clear that we have issues. But he says, take heart. I have authority. I have purpose. I am going before you. And last thing I want to talk about this morning is that God uses people. God uses people just the way he used Joseph. He's already seen the evil that's happened in your life, and he already has a plan for it if you allow him to work that plan. Those times when you feel alone, God is with you just like he's with Joseph. Just the way he took that coat that was torn and turned it into a royal one, God can use you as well. The second verse, Genesis 50:20, after he tells his brothers this, in verse 21, this is what he says. He says, do not fear, I will provide for you and your little ones. Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Joseph was able to take all of that hurt, all of that bad experience, and hand it over to God and allow God to now use him and use those bad experiences for the good. And he was able to tell his brothers, hey, I am going to provide for you and your little ones, even though everything you've done to me was to harm me, and he spoke kindly. And I think it's funny that it says he spoke kindly to him, because if you remember back, it says his brothers hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. But Joseph is now speaking kindly to him. He's looking at him saying, you meant evil, but if you didn't do that, I wouldn't not have been sold. If I hadn't been sold, I wouldn't have been sold to Potiphar. If I wasn't in Potiphar's house, I wouldn't have been wrongfully accused. If I wasn't wrongfully accused, I wouldn't have been thrown in the prison. If I wasn't thrown in the prison, I wouldn't have met those two guys. If I didn't meet those two guys, I couldn't interpret their dreams. If I didn't interpret their dreams, I wouldn't have been able to go meet the Pharaoh. If I didn't meet the Pharaoh, I wouldn't have been able to interpret his dreams and then be able to save up and save the lives of many. And now here I am going to provide for you and your little ones as well. God can use people to help other people. It's, are you willing to allow God to take those bad things in your life and then use them to help others? I've seen it. I've seen people who have been addicted to drugs and overcome drug addictions working in addiction ministries and doing amazing things. I've seen God being able to use people who've had deaths with whether it's a spouse or someone close and now doing grief share. People who've gone through divorce, counseling other people who are going to divorce because God can take those bad things and be able to use them to help other people. Not too long ago, a couple years ago, we all experienced something really bad. It was COVID, right? And sometimes we really like to focus on all the bad things. But I remember when it first shut everything down, it seemed like the end of the world. I was a couple years into a new ministry and the youth group was growing like crazy and things were going great. And all of a sudden we can't meet anymore. And I was like, what are we going to do now? And I remember hearing someone, a pastor, say that even though the world shut down, God's still working. Are you going to allow him to work during this tough time? And as we look back at it, God did work through that tough time. We like to focus on the bad, but more people got online and watched church for the very first time, and more people got connected online in different ways. And I think today we're still seeing how God's using that tough time of COVID. It's in our own lives. Are we going to allow God to use those tough times to help other people? So this morning, if you're going through something now, or if you've gone through something recently, know this. What the world meant or what the world wove for evil against you, God is weaving it for the good. You know, we sing a song with this exact same phrase. The song this morning that this whole sermon is about is actually a song called Sea of Victory. The bridge goes, you take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. So as the band starts to come up here soon and I'm going to sing this, I want you to think about those times in your life. And maybe it is right now. Maybe it's some hurt that you're still holding on to that you just can't seem to get over. You know, we live in a world where there is evil and there's spiritual attacks coming against us. But the hope this morning is that we serve a God who has authority over evil. We serve a God who has a purpose and a purpose to prosper us. We have a God who has gone before us and has already experienced and overcome it all. And we serve a God who can use other people to help people. He can use you this morning. Allow God to use you this morning. So I want you to think of those times. Do you need to change your perspective like Joseph to have that hope in those things? Let's pray.